They hammered in those first support beams at the crack of dawn. By the time anyone else awakened to greet the ocean sunrise, the skeletal outlines of brand-new chalets loomed along the dunes as if they'd materialized overnight. I found out purely by accident on what should have been an ordinary morning stroll across my family's coastal sanctuary, a stretch of protected shoreline in a small Oregon town, passed down through 3 generations. I've always started my day with a bracing walk on the damp sand, letting the salt breeze clear my head before diving into my daily responsibilities. But on this particular morning, I heard the distant hum of machinery as soon as I stepped out of my Jeep. That hum should never have been there. Not on my land, not at that hour. I froze. The swirl of seagulls overhead, the tang of seaweed in the air, all overshadowed by the unsettling rumble of heavy equipment. My boots sank into wet sand with each step as I trudged forward, scanning the horizon for any sign of disturbance. And then I saw it. A congregation of trucks and bulldozers perched near the dunes, well past the old sign that read Private Coastal Reserve, no unauthorized entry. A swirl of dust and churned gravel hung in the early light. My pulse quickened with every step, a mixture of disbelief and anger gnawing at my gut. At first I thought maybe the county had authorized some emergency repair or a utility crew was installing cables. But as I approached, the silhouettes of half-built chalets etched themselves against the pale sky, fresh beams and scaffolding rising from the sand like foreign invaders. My mouth ran dry. Who in their right mind would construct anything here, on a coastal sanctuary that my grandfather had painstakingly protected via strict legal covenants? At the far end, a fire escape beamed down, each bolt painted striking gold. The building spree looked orchestrated, like they'd planned it for months. My name is Nathan Ward. To most folks, I'm just a local who inherited a chunk of scenic coastline. They rarely suspect that I'm also the new head of environmental justice for this entire county, an office with sweeping authority to enforce land protection laws, shut down illegal developments, and fine offenders into oblivion if necessary. Typically, I keep that detail low-key. I prefer a normal life, minus the drama. But evidently, someone had decided to stake a claim on my family's land, ignoring every possible regulation, and they had no idea I possessed the power to bring their entire operation crashing down, if that's what it took. I stormed closer, my boots crunching over gravel that had no business existing on this delicate terrain. Workers in neon vests bustled around, each seemingly too busy to notice me. The chaotic hum of a generator, the pounding of nail guns, the hiss of a portable cement mixer, none of it belonged on this quiet shore. With my jaw set, I marched toward the makeshift office trailer perched near the biggest half-framed chalet. A tall fence post hammered into the sand caught my eye, a bright sign reading Seabreeze HOA Development, members only beyond this point. My fury flared. Seabreeze, HOA, a name I'd heard in passing around town, rumored to be led by a formidable woman who'd orchestrated expansions in multiple neighborhoods, often dancing on the edge of legal boundaries. So now, she'd decided to carve out a chunk of my coastal sanctuary for high-end. Outrage thrummed in my veins, accompanied by a grim satisfaction. They had no clue how badly they'd miscalculated. I reached the trailer, heart pounding with a mixture of anger and cautious curiosity. With a curt knock, I pushed open the flimsy door. Inside, a woman in a sleek gray suit stood behind a folding table covered in blueprints and property maps. She was on the phone, her posture radiating authority, but the moment she saw me, her brow creased in mild annoyance. "I'll call you back," she snapped into the phone, then turned to me with an impatient smile. "And you are?" she asked, flipping her phone onto the table as though I was an inconvenient scheduling mishap. I forced my tone steady, though the rage simmering inside threatened to boil over. "Nathan Ward," I said, deliberately omitting my title. "Owner of this property. Or did you not notice the sign that says Private Coastal Reserve?" For a fleeting second, her eyes flickered with something akin to surprise, but she hid it behind a polished veneer. "This land belongs to Seabreeze HOA, under a newly filed extension," she countered coolly, plucking a glossy brochure from a stack. We're constructing 35 luxurious coastal chalets to meet the high demand for oceanfront living. My board authorized it months ago. I'm Serena Clark, by the way, president of Seabreeze HOA. She extended the brochure as though it legitimized her incursion. I stared at the bold pictures of fancy chalets, pitched roofs, large windows overlooking hypothetical sunsets. It was all too tidy, too confident. My father's will and decades-old legal covenants demanded the area remain a protected sanctuary, especially since nesting seabirds use these dunes. There's no scenario where your HOA can claim this land, I said, voice taut. We never sold or granted an easement. If you have permits, I want to see them right now, because from where I stand, you're trespassing on my property, building illegally, and violating multiple environmental laws. My words seemed to amuse her. She offered a thin, dismissive smile. We have a streamlined permission from certain county officials, she said vaguely. You might want to check with them. Meanwhile, our construction schedule is tight. If you have complaints, speak to our attorneys. I'm afraid we're too far in to halt this project. She waved a hand as though brushing me away like a pesky gull. The arrogance rendered me speechless for a heartbeat. Then I inhaled slow, choosing not to reveal my real position, yet. This is a protected sanctuary, I managed, and you're about to pay dearly if you think you can steamroll local codes. Keep building at your own risk, Miss Clark. She cocked an eyebrow, smirk on her lips. I appreciate the warning, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Good day. Fuming, I left the trailer, my mind already spinning with ways to shut them down. My usual approach in environment conflicts was to gather evidence quietly, then strike with legal force. Miss Clark had no idea she was dealing with the county's new head of environmental justice, a role with the power to freeze developments, impose monstrous fines, and enforce land protection orders. My immediate plan: confirm that no legitimate paperwork existed, then file an emergency injunction to block further construction. If Ms. Clark insisted on defying me, I'd bury her under court orders and watch those half-finished chalets vanish from the dunes. Driving back to the county offices, I had to calm my pulse, thinking about how to proceed methodically. First, confirm land ownership, obviously in my name, but let's be thorough. Next, confirm no building permit was ever filed or, if it was, that it was fraudulent. Then gather evidence of environmental law violations. The area was home to fragile dune ecosystems, plovers that nested in the sand, plus strict regulations about building distances from the high tide line. If Ms. Clark had somehow bribed a small-time official to sign off, it wouldn't hold up under real scrutiny. I called my top enforcement officer, Ingrid, a sharp-eyed woman with zero tolerance for code breakers. Ingrid, I said, voice vibrating with anger. We have an emergency. The Seabreeze HOA is building 35 chalets on my family's coastal reserve. No legitimate paperwork. I need you to pull every record they might have, plus check for environmental review status. Ingrid let out a low whistle. On your land? That's brazen. I'll get on it. We can probably push for an immediate stop work order. Precisely. Within hours, Ingrid confirmed my suspicions. No building permits, no environmental assessments, no mention in the official logs. There was just a suspicious approval from a defunct committee that no longer existed, with signatures that looked tampered. The entire operation reeked of corruption. I wasted no time drafting a formal cease and desist order, referencing every local and state regulation Ms. Clark was trampling. Ingrid and I marched into the local courthouse that afternoon, requesting an emergency injunction. The judge, a middle-aged man known for his environmental leanings, heard our case promptly. We showed him photos of the half-finished chalets, a map of the sanctuary clearly marked in my name, and evidence that no real permit had ever been granted. He wasted no time signing the injunction, forbidding further construction until a full hearing could be held. Armed with the court order, I returned to the site the next morning, this time with Ingrid and 2 uniformed county code enforcers. We posted bright notices around the perimeter, hammered a large sign reading, "Cease all construction, violations under investigation." and approached Miss Clark's trailer to hand her the official documents. She accepted them with an icy calm, but a flicker of annoyance passed over her face. "You realize this project is nearly halfway done," she said, brow furrowed. "Halting now would cause massive financial losses." I forced a tight smile. "That's not my fault. You built illegally." She narrowed her eyes. "Our attorneys will challenge this. We have a right to develop coastal property, especially if local authorities gave us the nod." Ingrid cleared her throat. "Then produce that nod in court. Meanwhile, no further building is allowed." Miss Clark glared, but didn't respond. For a moment I allowed myself to hope she'd comply. Some developers, once confronted with a solid injunction, choose to negotiate or bide time until the hearing. But Ms. Clark, as I soon discovered, thrived on defiance. That very evening, a fisherman friend who passed near the beach called to tell me lights were on and the sound of saws echoed across the dunes. My rage skyrocketed. They were building at night, ignoring the brand new court order. Ingrid raced out to confirm, returning with video proof. Dozens of workers installing roof beams under portable floodlights, Ms. Clark nowhere in sight. In the following emergency hearing, the judge raged at Ms. Clark's open contempt, slapping the HOA with daily fines. Ms. Clark feigned ignorance, claiming miscommunication. The judge threatened to escalate to forced demolition if they continued. I expected Ms. Clark to cower. Instead, she left the courtroom with a tight-lipped expression that spelled trouble. She evidently believed her rumored connections or HOA funds would shield her from the law. She had no clue I was just getting started. Despite the rising daily fines, the chalet frames continued to expand. Ingrid and I documented everything. Foundation after foundation poured. New deliveries of lumber, more defiance. Some nights, construction paused when word spread we might appear. But as soon as we left, they resumed, fighting to complete enough of the project that we'd be forced to let them remain. Miss Clark must have thought if she got the chalets operational, the outcry might protect them. She was playing chicken with the entire legal system, ignoring that I had a direct line to bigger agencies. Finally, exasperated, I invoked my role as head of environmental justice, contacting the state's Coastal Protection Bureau. I laid out Miss Clark's brazenness, her refusal to heed court orders, the ecological harm, dune erosion, potential marine pollution, disturbance of nesting birds. The Bureau's top official responded with alarm, promising swift intervention. Meanwhile, Ms. Clark escalated her PR campaign. She gave a press conference at the site's entrance, painting me as a rogue official trying to stifle economic growth. She claimed the chalets offered eco-friendly tourism, a laughable statement when I'd personally seen them bulldoze sensitive dunes. The local media latched onto the drama, branding it the shoreline standoff. Some folks sympathized with the idea of new tourism money, but once the press hammered on the stolen land angle, my private sanctuary plus 0 valid permits, public sympathy tilted my way. Miss Clark's supporters shrank. Still, the chalets rose. My orchard of seagrass-laden dunes was overshadowed by beams and scaffolding. Wooden decks started appearing, vantage points for tourists to watch the waves, ironically built on illegally seized ground. Even from afar, my heart twisted at the sight. The serenity that once defined my father's coast was replaced by hammering, diesel fumes, bright floodlights at night. Ingrid found growing evidence of plovers driven from their nesting sites. Dunes collapsing near the new foundations, visible damage from unregulated runoff. It was an environmental crime scene. Ms. Clark pressed forward, certain she could outlast me. But she overlooked the final weapon in my arsenal, the ability to coordinate with state authorities to forcibly demolish any illegal structure harming the coastal environment, especially on private property. After collecting months' worth of violation proofs, ignoring repeated court injunctions, we had enough to request the final step, a forced teardown. The local judge, outraged by Miss Clark's defiance, authorized it with a single flourish of his pen. Miss Clark's attorney fumed, threatened appeals. The judge gave them 72 hours to comply voluntarily or face immediate demolition by state contractors, all costs billed to Miss Clark and her HOA. The tension soared. Miss Clark's last stand? She tried forging partial compliance, halting some construction while quietly finishing the chalets that were 80% complete. Her workers hammered behind tarps, hoping to hide progress from prying eyes. Ingrid discovered it the next day, exasperated. The daily fines skyrocketed. Miss Clark's finances presumably bled out, but she evidently bet that finishing the chalets could lead to a settlement. My position was unwavering. Tear them all down, or show some real permits we both knew didn't exist. When the 72 hours expired, Miss Clark made a feeble attempt at negotiation, offering to pay a substantial fee if the chalets could stand. I laughed bitterly at the phone call. "You can't buy your way out of environmental crimes," I told her, voice ice cold. She threatened political repercussions. I reminded her I was beyond local politics, now backed by state environmental agencies. Her bravado cracked, replaced by desperation. The state demolition crew arrived at dawn the next day, accompanied by local law enforcement. Ms. Clark, looking haggard, demanded we wait, claiming she had a last-minute court appeal. No such order materialized. The bulldozers roared to life. The crowd of onlookers, some ex-HOA supporters, some outraged neighbors, stood by, cameras rolling, as those brand-new chalets, half of them near completion, were torn apart in a dusty, spectacular meltdown. I watched from a slight rise, fists clenched at my sides, torn between relief and heartbreak at the sight of so much wasted material. The orchard dunes, battered by construction, would need restoration, but at least the chalets themselves would vanish, freeing the beach from an illegal invasion. Miss Clark stood near the tape line, tears of anger wetting her cheeks, flanked by a handful of silent board members. She tried to approach me, possibly to fling a final insult or plea. A deputy blocked her path. My jaw tightened. If she'd obeyed from the start, maybe we'd have found some compromise. Now it was too late. Twisted beams and shattered planks rained down under the bulldozer's relentless advance. The crack of timber and hiss of collapsing roofs echoed across the dunes. Miss Clark covered her face, perhaps regretting every arrogant choice. My orchard, though scarred, would survive. Over time, we could restore the dunes, replant grasses, coax wildlife back. The ephemeral image of those chalets was replaced by rubble piles loaded into dump trucks, shipped away as Miss Clark's grand dream disintegrated. After the dust settled, Miss Clark faced crippling fines, potential criminal charges for repeated contempt, plus a swirl of lawsuits from investors who'd sunk money into a project she assured them was greenlit. She resigned from the HOA in disgrace, rumored to have left town. A scathing editorial in the local paper labeled her fiasco the worst miscalculation in coastal development history. People asked me if I felt satisfied. Not exactly. Part of me mourned the orchard's damage. But I took solace that, in the end, the law triumphed, safeguarding that fragile coastline from becoming a soulless cluster of luxury chalets. The local press declared me the quiet hero, the new head of environmental justice who proved unstoppable. I shrugged off the praise. I was just doing my job, defending the place my father cherished. In the months that followed, we oversaw restoration efforts. Volunteers helped remove leftover debris, replant native dune grass, and create safe nesting zones for seabirds that had scattered. The orchard's battered corners gradually regained life. The state authorities recognized the site's significance, awarding grant money for conservation improvements. I'd stand on the beach at dusk, listening to gulls cry, heart full of relief that Ms. Clark's monstrous chalets no longer towered over the horizon. My father used to say, "The ocean will always reclaim what's stolen from it." In a way, he was right, though this time we used bulldozers instead of tides. Occasionally, reporters still come by to interview me about the chalet showdown, as some called it. They ask how it felt to discover that brazen incursion, how I mustered the nerve to tear down half-finished homes. I explain it was never about nerve but principle. My family's rightful land, the environment's fragile beauty, And my official duty as the county's environmental guardian. Ms. Clark bet she could flout the rules, but she wandered into a well-laid trap. As soon as I realized her scheme, I leveraged every legal mechanism at my disposal. She walked right into it, refusing every chance to stand down, until we had no choice but to demolish her dream. That's what happens when you challenge someone who not only owns the land but also holds the final say on environmental law in the region. Today, the orchard and dunes look nearly back to normal, minus a few lingering scars. The gulls nest freely, crabs scuttle along tide pools, and the hush of the surf persists unbroken by the clang of construction. My mother, who worried the orchard would never recover, now breathes easier each time she strolls the shoreline at sunrise. I join her sometimes, pausing where we once found the skeletal frames of chalets, replaced now by restored dunes. The tension that once knotted my chest has eased. Miss Clark's shadow no longer looms over these sands. People wonder if I'd do it again. Without hesitation, I tell them. No one tramples my orchard, my father's sanctuary, and countless environmental laws for profit. Miss Clark thought she had unstoppable funds and sway. She never realized the local kid who inherited the orchard was also the new head of environmental justice, armed with authority stronger than any HOA resolution. She discovered the truth too late, stepping into a legal and moral trap from which she couldn't escape. I remained vigilant. Who knows what next developer might eye these pristine shores hungry for an oceanfront payday. But they'll learn the region fosters an unwavering guardian, a local official with personal stakes in every wave that kisses the sand. My father taught me that sometimes land itself calls for protection, and it's our duty to answer. Ms. Clark tested that duty and lost. If others follow her path, they'll face the same fate. That's the final lesson. You can't build 35 chalets on my coastal sanctuary without consequence. You might glimpse quick profits, but once you realize I hold the power to regulate every environmental aspect, you'll see you've walked right into my trap, just like Ms. Clark. And in the end, the dunes stand triumphant, the orchard breathes free, while those who disrespected them vanish into the wreckage of their own arrogance.